The Covenant of Equals was the largest space station in the known galaxy. It hung in orbit above the neutral world of Thesson Prime, like a silver wheel spinning slowly against the stars. Inside its walls, hundreds of alien species walked, talked, argued, and traded. It was the center of galactic politics, the place where the 12 most powerful civilizations met to decide the fate of everyone else. And on the day Lena Vasquez arrived, it smelled like recycled air and old arguments. She stepped off the human transport shuttle with a small bag over her shoulder and a polite smile on her face. She was 32 years old, short, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple tie. She wore a high-collared jacket with long sleeves that covered her arms completely, even though the station was warm. She looked like exactly what her identification said she was, a junior trade attaché from the human delegation, here to observe and take notes and stay out of the way. Nobody looked at her twice. That was fine. Humans never got looked at twice out here. Humanity had only been traveling between the stars for about 140 years, which made them babies by galactic standards. The Raylith had been building empires when humans were still figuring out fire. The Vren had conquered a dozen star systems before Earth's first satellite left the atmosphere. Even the gentle Olani, who were the kindest species in the galaxy, had been sailing through space for thousands of years before humans showed up. So when the human delegation arrived at the Covenant station, nobody cared much. A few Raylith, tall beings made of something that looked like living crystal, with bodies that clicked and chimed when they moved, watched the humans walk past and made sounds that translated roughly to laughter. One of them said something to another about how humans were soft and slow and breakable, like toys that had wandered into a room full of knives. They did not bother to lower their voices. Lena heard every word. She kept smiling. The human delegation was given quarters on one of the lower levels, far from the grand halls where the council met. Their rooms were small and plain. The head of the delegation, a tired-looking man named Chen, told everyone to unpack, rest, and remember that they were here to listen and learn, not to make trouble. Lena nodded along with the others and went to her room. Alone, she set her bag down and stood in front of the small mirror. She pulled down the collar of her jacket, just slightly, and looked at the edge of what lay beneath. Color. Deep orange and black, so detailed it almost seemed to breathe. The head of a tiger, its eyes closed, its face calm and still, resting on her collarbone. The tattoo continued down her right arm, a massive piece of art that covered her from shoulder to wrist, a tiger in full stride, surrounded by patterns that shifted between stripes and something else, something geometric and precise if you looked closely enough. But nobody ever looked that closely. It was just a tattoo. Humans were known to decorate their skin. The galaxy found it amusing, like children drawing on themselves. Lena pulled her collar back up and went to the observation deck. The deck was a long, curved room with a wall made entirely of transparent material, offering a view of open space that stretched forever. A few alien delegates stood in small groups, talking quietly. Lena found an empty spot near the edge and stood there, looking out at the stars. She had been on the station for less than 3 hours when everything changed. It started with a sound, a deep vibration that moved through the floor and into her bones. Then the lights flickered. Then the alarms began. Not the soft chimes of a routine alert, but the sharp, repeating blare of a threat warning. Around her, aliens stopped talking and looked at each other with confusion that quickly turned to fear. On the other side of the viewport, ships appeared, dozens of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that was unmistakably military. They were Vren warships, massive, dark, covered in angular armor plating that made them look like fists made of iron. The Vren were the most feared military power in the quadrant. They were reptilian, scaled, powerful, and they had never once in their history lost a war. Their ships alone made most species surrender before a single shot was fired. At the head of the fleet was the largest ship Lena had ever seen. It was the personal flagship of Torek Hall, a Vren warlord who had risen to power by crushing everyone who stood in his way. His face appeared on every screen in the station moments later, broad, scarred, with yellow eyes that burned with cold intelligence. He spoke in a voice that rumbled like stone grinding against stone. He told the council that 3 border systems now belonged to the Vren. He told them this was not a request. He told them they had 72 hours to agree, or he would take the systems by force, and the station with them. And then, to prove he was serious, he gave an order. One of his ships turned its weapons on a civilian cargo hauler that had been drifting near the station. A small vessel carrying food and medical supplies to a colony world. The cargo hauler tried to run. It made it about 4 seconds before the Vren weapons tore it apart. The explosion was bright and brief and silent in the vacuum of space. And then there was nothing left but spinning debris and the fading glow of fire without air to feed it. On the observation deck, aliens screamed. Some ran. Some stood frozen. The Raylith clicked and chimed in sounds that meant terror. An Olani ambassador, a soft-bodied being with large dark eyes and gentle tentacles, pressed herself against the wall and made a sound like weeping. Lena did not scream. She did not run. She stood at the viewport and watched the debris field spread and cool and disappear into the dark. Her face showed nothing. Her hands were at her sides, and her right hand rested against her sleeve, against the place where the tiger lay hidden beneath the fabric. Deep under the cloth, in ink that was not really ink at all, something stirred. The tiger's eyes, which had been closed since the day the tattoo was placed on her skin, slowly opened. They were gold, bright, and sharp, and they looked out at the Vren fleet with the calm focus of a predator that had just found its prey. Nobody saw it. Nobody ever saw it. That was the point. Across the observation deck, the Olani ambassador, her name was Thessera, wiped her eyes and tried to calm herself. As she did, she looked around the room at the panicking delegates, searching for something steady to focus on. Her gaze fell on the small human woman standing alone at the viewport, perfectly still in the middle of chaos. Thessera was an empath. Her species could sense the emotions of others like colors in the air. She reached out with that sense now, expecting to feel the fear that filled every other being in the room. What she felt instead made her go very still. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something old and vast and coiled tight, like a spring pressed down for a very long time, waiting to be released. It was patient. It was ready. And it was coming from inside that small, harmless-looking woman with the warm smile and the long sleeves. Thessera leaned toward her aide, her tentacles trembling, and whispered a question she could not answer herself. What is she? The next morning, the Dominion Council met behind closed doors. The 12 most powerful species in the galaxy sat around a curved table in a grand hall lined with symbols of unity and cooperation that suddenly felt like decorations at a funeral. The mood was fear, pure and simple, and fear made powerful beings do small things. The Raylith spoke first. Their lead ambassador, a tall crystalline figure named Sor Vethis, clicked and chimed in careful tones. His proposal was simple. Give Torek Kal the 3 border systems. They were not Raylith systems. They were not important. The people living there could be relocated. It was a small price for peace. Several other species nodded in agreement. The Vren fleet was massive. No one could match it alone. Fighting back would mean war, and war with the Vren meant death. The Olani ambassador, Thesara, argued against surrender. She said that giving territory to a bully only made the bully hungry for more. But her voice was soft, and her species had no warships. Her words floated in the room and settled on deaf ears. The humans were not invited to the meeting. They were not council members. They were not considered relevant. Lena did not try to attend. She did not need to. She already knew what they would say before they said it. She knew because she had spent the night reading, not books or reports, but the data that lived inside her own skin. In the quiet of her small room, she had rolled up her sleeve and placed her hand flat on the surface of the tiger tattoo. The ink responded to her touch. It warmed. The patterns in the tiger's stripes shifted, rearranging themselves into lines of text and numbers and maps that only she could read. Information flowed up through her nervous system, like water filling a glass. Clean, clear, and cold. The tattoo was not a decoration. It was a living archive. Encoded in its nano-reactive ink was the combined intelligence of over a century of human observation. Every human who had ever visited an alien world, worked on an alien station, or shared a drink with an alien trader, had been part of a network so quiet that not even most humans knew it existed. They watched, they listened, they remembered, and everything they learned was encoded and passed to the wardens, people like Lena, who carried the knowledge in their skin and in their bones and in the patterns of a tattoo that looked like nothing more than art. Lena knew the Vren fleet's supply lines. She knew which ships had engine problems. She knew that Torek Kal's alliance with two of his own captains was held together by threats, not loyalty. She knew things about the Vren that the Vren themselves had forgotten, or tried to forget. She got dressed, pulled her sleeves down, put on her harmless smile, and went to work. She found Thesara in a quiet garden area on the station's middle level, sitting among artificial plants that glowed with soft blue light. The Olani ambassador looked exhausted. Her skin, which was normally a healthy blue-green, had gone pale. Lena sat down beside her and said nothing for a while. Then she spoke, gently. "The Vren fleet has 46 ships in this sector," she said. "But 11 of them are running on damaged power cores from a battle 3 years ago that they never properly repaired. Their supply chain runs through the Kethis corridor, which is narrow and difficult to defend. And Torek Kal's second-in-command has been in secret contact with a Vren reformist faction that wants to end the expansion. He would turn on Torek if he believed Torek would lose." Thesara stared at her. "How do you know this?" "We pay attention," Lena said. Thesara's large dark eyes studied the human woman for a long time. She could feel the emotions coming off Lena, calm, focused, certain. Not the feelings of someone who was guessing. The feelings of someone who knew. "Why are you telling me?" Thesara asked. "Because you are the only one on the council who argued against giving in," Lena said. "And because what I know is useless if no one is willing to act on it." Over the next several hours, Lena moved through the station like smoke through an open window. She visited delegation after delegation, always quiet, always polite, always smiling. She spoke with the Kelthari, a species of tall, fur-covered beings who had strong ships but no courage to use them. She told them exactly where the Vren fleet's sensor blind spots were. She spoke with the Dothani, small amphibious creatures who controlled the station's communication relays. She told them about a Vren encryption weakness that would let them intercept fleet commands. She spoke with 4 other delegations, and to each one, she gave a piece of information that was precise, specific, and impossible for a junior human trade attaché to know. People began to talk. Who was this woman? Where was she getting her information? Some suspected she was a spy. Others thought she was bluffing. But the data she shared was too accurate, too detailed, too useful to ignore completely. Seeds of doubt about the Vren's invincibility began to take root in minds that had been ready to surrender. It was late in the station's artificial evening when Lena turned the corner in a narrow service corridor and found Torek Kal standing in front of her. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled body thick with muscle and covered in ceremonial armor that was scratched and dented from real combat. His yellow eyes looked down at her the way a mountain looks down at a stone. Behind him stood 2 Vren guards, each one big enough to break her in half without effort. "You are the human," he said. His translator made his voice sound like gravel in a metal drum. "I have heard you are busy, talking, whispering, telling stories to frighten little creatures." Lena looked up at him. She had to tilt her head far back to meet his eyes. She kept her hands relaxed at her sides. "Just making conversation," she said. Torek leaned down, bringing his scarred face close to hers. His breath was hot and smelled like iron. "Your species is soft," he said. "Small, weak. You have no warships, no army, no power. You are worms crawling in the dirt, and you have come to a place where giants walk." He flicked her shoulder with one massive clawed finger, hard enough to make her stumble. "Go back to your room, little worm, before I step on you." Lena steadied herself. The smile had not left her face, but something in her eyes changed. Something shifted behind the warmth, like a shadow moving behind a curtain. "I know about Vrethnal," she said quietly. The corridor went silent. Even the hum of the station systems seemed to fade. Torek Kal did not move. His yellow eyes, which had been full of amusement and contempt, went flat and hard like stones. Vrethnal was a name that had been erased from Vren history. It was a battle, fought centuries ago, where the Vren had suffered their only true defeat, crushed by a coalition they had underestimated, broken so badly that it nearly ended their civilization. The Vren had spent generations burying that name, destroying records, killing historians who spoke of it. No living species was supposed to know it. "Who told you that name?" Torek said, and his voice was no longer loud. It was quiet, which was worse. "No one told me," Lena said. "We found it ourselves. We found everything, Torek. Every secret, every failure, every weakness. We have been watching you for a very long time." Torek grabbed her arm. His grip was powerful enough to crush bone. He pulled her toward him, and the fabric of her sleeve tore. The tiger was exposed. It covered her arm from shoulder to wrist, orange and black, so detailed it seemed to breathe. And as Torek stared at it, the ink moved. The stripes rippled and rearranged themselves, flowing like liquid, forming patterns that were not art, but data. Star maps, fleet positions, structural diagrams, mathematical equations. They flickered across her skin for 3 seconds, then settled back into the shape of a tiger. The tiger's golden eyes were open now, and they were looking directly at Torek Kal. He released her arm and stepped back. His guards reached for their weapons, but Torek held up a hand to stop them. He was staring at Lena with an expression she had never seen on a Vren before. It was fear. Lena pulled the torn sleeve over her arm as best she could. "You should not have destroyed that cargo ship," she said softly. "Those people did not deserve to die. And now you have my attention." She walked past him, past his guards, and disappeared around the corner. Her footsteps were soft and steady and unhurried. Torek stood in the corridor for a long time. Then he turned and walked to the nearest communication terminal. He opened a channel to his fleet and spoke 4 words. "Move the timeline up. The attack would come in 24 hours. And in his next breath, he gave one more order to his second-in-command. "Find the human woman. Kill her first." The Vren moved fast. Within 6 hours of Torek's order, squads of armored soldiers began marching through the station's corridors, under the excuse of security enforcement. They sealed docking bays. They took control of communication relays. They posted guards at every major intersection and told the alien delegates that it was for their own protection. Nobody believed it. But nobody was brave enough to argue with soldiers who carried plasma rifles and had the cold eyes of creatures that had been bred for war. The council was paralyzed. Some species had already surrendered. The Raylith ambassador Sor Vethis locked himself in his quarters and sent a message to his homeworld telling them to prepare for the new political reality. The galaxy was folding like paper under a heavy hand. In the middle of this collapse, Lena Vasquez sat in the human delegation's small common room and drank a cup of tea. Chen, the head of the delegation, was pacing. "We need to leave," he said for the 4th time. "The Vren are taking the station. This is not our fight. We are trade observers, nothing more." Lena set her cup down. "You should go," she said. "Take the delegation to the shuttle. I will stay." Chen stopped pacing and looked at her. There was something in his face that suggested he knew more about Lena than he had ever been told directly, but not enough to understand what was happening. "Lena, what are you going to do?" "My job," she said. Chen opened his mouth, closed it, and then did something that surprised both of them. He nodded, gathered the rest of the delegation, and left for the shuttle bay without another word. Sometimes you could feel the weight of a moment, even if you could not see its shape. Lena was alone. She stood up, removed her torn jacket, and rolled up her sleeves. The tiger tattoo was fully visible now, covering her right arm and climbing up over her shoulder and across her collarbone. In the quiet of the empty room, it glowed faintly, the ink warm with a light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The tiger's eyes were open and bright. The stripes moved slowly, like grass in a gentle wind, cycling through patterns of data that flowed just beneath the surface of her skin. She took a deep breath and pressed her palm flat against the tattoo's center, the tiger's chest, right where its heart would be. "Wake up," she whispered. The ink blazed. Light flooded up her arm and across her body, tracing lines along her veins, her muscles, her bones. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming, like standing in a river of information while her body tried to drink it all. Her pupils expanded, her heartbeat steadied to a rhythm that was too even, too controlled to be natural. The nanosymbiotic system bonded to her nervous system came fully online for the first time in years, flooding her cells with compounds that sharpened her reflexes, hardened her skin at the molecular level, and fed tactical data directly into her visual field. She could see the station's layout overlaid on her vision like a ghost map. She could see heat signatures through walls. She could feel the vibration of Vren boots on the deck, 3 corridors away, and she knew from the pattern of their steps that there were 6 of them, moving in a kill formation, heading directly for her. Torek had sent his best. She stepped out into the corridor and waited. They came around the corner in a tight group. 6 Vren elite warriors, each one armored head to tail, carrying short-range energy blades designed for close combat in tight spaces. They were enormous, fast for their size, and trained from birth to kill. When they saw her standing alone in the corridor, small, unarmored, human, the lead warrior made a sound that might have been laughter. He was the first one she dropped. The lead warrior swung his blade in a horizontal arc meant to cut her in half, but she was already beneath it, sliding under his reach and driving the heel of her palm into a nerve cluster just below his jaw, that the Vren did not believe any outsider knew about. His eyes rolled back and he fell like a tree. Before his body hit the ground, she had turned, caught the second warrior's blade arm at the elbow, twisted it against the joint at an angle that used his own strength against him, and sent him into the wall hard enough to crack his armor. The remaining 4 attacked at once. They were fast. They were coordinated. They had trained together for years. It did not matter. Lena's body was running on a system that processed combat data faster than conscious thought. The tattoo fed her information in real time. The position of every limb, the angle of every strike, the structural weaknesses in Vren armor, the gaps in their formation that opened and closed like breathing. She did not think. She moved. She struck the 3rd warrior in the throat, collapsed the 4th warrior's knee with a precise kick to a joint that bent the wrong way under enough pressure, caught the 5th warrior's blade between her palms and snapped it, and put the 6th warrior on the ground with a throw that used his own weight and momentum to slam him into the deck plating. 90 seconds. 6 elite Vren warriors, all of them alive, but unable to stand. Lena was breathing hard. Her skin was hot. The tiger tattoo blazed on her arm like a living flame, its golden eyes burning. She looked down at the warriors on the ground, and there was something in her expression that was not triumph. It was sadness. She had not wanted this. She had hoped quietly that it would not come to this. But it had, because it always did, because the galaxy was a place that respected only one thing, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. The security feeds had captured everything. Every camera in the corridor had recorded the fight, and the footage was already spreading through the station's network, like fire through dry grass. In delegation quarters across the station, aliens watched the small human woman dismantle a Vren kill team with her bare hands. They watched the tattoo burn on her skin. They watched her stand over fallen warriors who were each 3 times her size, not even breathing hard. And they felt something shift inside their understanding of the universe. Lena walked to the nearest communication terminal. She placed her tattooed hand on the console, and the tiger's stripes rearranged once more, this time flowing off her skin and into the station's systems. Data poured through the network. Not a virus, not an attack, but a gift. A compressed archive of intelligence that expanded as it traveled, filling every screen on the station and transmitting outward on every frequency strong enough to reach Torek's fleet. It contained everything. Vren military installations, maps down to the individual room. Supply routes with schedules and weaknesses. Fleet compositions, ship by ship, with performance data and maintenance records. Political secrets, hidden alliances, broken promises. 140 years of patient, quiet, invisible human observation, gathered by thousands of ordinary people who had smiled and nodded and been ignored, and who had watched everything while the galaxy looked right through them. Lena opened a channel and spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, and carried no anger. "This is Lena Vasquez. I am a warden of Earth. The information you are now receiving is real, and it is complete. Every species on this station has been watched by human eyes since the day we first left our homeworld. We were on your trade ships, in your markets, in your libraries and your ports and your border stations. We sat in your waiting rooms and stood in your hallways, and you never once looked at us, because you believed we were not worth seeing." She paused and let the silence hold. "We never needed a seat on your council. We were always in the room. In every room. On every station. In every port. You just never thought to look." The station was silent. In the council chamber, the Raylith ambassador stood motionless, his crystalline body dark with shock. In the Olani quarters, Thesara listened to the broadcast and felt tears running down her face. Not from fear, but from something she did not have a word for. A feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff and watching the landscape change forever. She found Lena an hour later, standing alone in a corridor, the tattoo still glowing faintly on her arm. Thesara approached slowly, her tentacles folded in a gesture of deep respect. You are the most patient predators the galaxy has ever known, Thesaurus said quietly. Lena looked at her with tired eyes and the ghost of a smile. We prefer the word careful. Before Thesaurus could respond, the station shook. Alarm screamed. On every screen, the same message appeared. The Vren fleet was powering weapons. Torek Kal, humiliated and enraged, had given the order to destroy the station and everyone on it. He would rather burn it all than let the truth survive. Lena looked up at the ceiling, feeling the vibration of the fleet's targeting systems locking on. The tiger on her arm blazed brighter. She closed her eyes, and deep inside her mind, she reached out along a channel that only wardens could access. A signal that traveled faster than light, encoded in frequencies that no alien technology had ever detected. She sent 2 words. It's time. The Vren fleet formed a ring around the Covenant station, like a fist closing around a throat. 46 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack open a moon, turned their guns inward and waited for the order to fire. Inside the station, people ran. Aliens of every shape and size filled the corridors, pushing toward shuttle bays, escape pods, anywhere that felt like it might offer a way out. Some prayed. The Rayleigh hummed a death hymn, a high-pitched crystal tone that vibrated through the walls. The Olani gathered in circles and held each other with their tentacles, their empathic senses overwhelmed by the collective terror of thousands of beings who believed they were about to die. Torek Kal stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the station through the viewport. His scarred face was a mask of cold fury. The human woman had humiliated him. She had broadcast his secrets to the galaxy. She had exposed the Vren, the most feared species in known space, as something that could be studied, mapped, and understood. That was worse than any weapon. A weapon could be endured. Understanding could not. If the galaxy stopped fearing the Vren were nothing. So the station would burn. Everyone on it would die. And the message would be simple. This is what happens when you look at us too closely. All ships, Torek said, fire on my command. His weapons officer began the targeting sequence. On screens across the station, countdown timers appeared. 90 seconds to full bombardment. 80 seconds. 70. Lena Vasquez stood in the station's central operations room, her tattoo blazing so brightly that it lit the walls around her with orange and gold light. Her eyes were closed. Her hand was pressed flat against a console, and through the tattoo's nanosystem, she was connected to every sensor on the station. She could feel the Vren fleet like hotspots on a map. She could count their weapons charging. She could measure the energy building in their targeting arrays. She could also feel something else, something approaching from the edges of the sensor range, moving fast and quiet, hidden behind electronic noise and false signals that made them invisible to Vren scanners. 60 seconds. Come on, she whispered. 50 seconds. On the bridge of Torek's flagship, a junior officer frowned at his sensor display. Something was wrong with the readings on the outer edge of the fleet's perimeter. Ghost signals. Phantom returns. Probably just interference from the station's communication burst, he thought. He made a note and ignored it. That was a mistake. 40 seconds. 30. 20. At 15 seconds to bombardment, the galaxy changed. They did not arrive through faster-than-light travel. They were already there. They had been there for hours, days, maybe longer, drifting in the dark, with their systems powered down, and their hulls coated in materials that absorbed every scanner frequency the Vren used. Now they powered up all at once, and the darkness around the Covenant station lit up like a field of sudden stars. They were human ships, not the small, battered trade vessels the galaxy was used to seeing. These were warships, sleek, angular, built with a purpose that was obvious at a glance. Each one bore the same emblem on its hull, painted in bright orange against dark metal. a snarling tiger. The human fleet had been hiding in plain sight. For years, decades, the ships had traveled the galaxy disguised as cargo haulers, research vessels, and civilian transports. They had docked at alien stations. They had passed through Vren-controlled space. They had been scanned, inspected, and waved through, because they looked harmless, just like every other human thing the galaxy had ever seen. Beneath the disguises, they carried weapon systems designed from the ground up to exploit every weakness that a century of intelligence gathering had revealed. This was humanity's second secret. They had not just been watching, they had been preparing. The Vren fleet reacted with trained speed, turning their weapons from the station to the new threat. They outnumbered the human ships and outweighed them by a factor of 10. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. It was not, on paper. The human fleet did not fight the way any species in the galaxy had ever fought. They did not form battle lines. They did not advance in formation. They did not try to match the Vren's firepower with their own. Instead, they moved like a school of fish, fast, fluid, unpredictable, breaking apart and reforming in patterns that had no apparent logic, until you saw the results. The first wave targeted communications. Small, fast human ships dove through the gaps between Vren warships and released precision strikes on antenna arrays and signal relays. Within minutes, the Vren fleet's ability to coordinate was crippled. Ships that had been operating as a single force suddenly became 46 individual vessels, each one cut off from the others. And that was when the trap closed. The Vren military ran on a rigid chain of command. Every ship waited for orders from the flagship. Every captain followed the battle plan exactly as written. It was their greatest strength in a normal fight. Perfect discipline, perfect coordination. But when the communications died, the discipline became a cage. Captains who had never been trained to think for themselves sat on their bridges and waited for orders that would never come, while human ships circled them like wolves around frozen prey. The human captains did not wait for orders. They did not need to. Every ship in the human fleet operated on a principle that the Vren could not understand: independent judgment within a shared purpose. Each captain knew the overall goal and was trusted to find their own way to achieve it. They adapted in real time, changing tactics from moment to moment based on what they saw in front of them. When one approach failed, they tried another without hesitation. When an opportunity appeared, they took it without asking permission. It was chaos from the Vren perspective. It was art from anyone else's. On the station, the delegates watched the battle on every screen. They saw human ships dance between Vren dreadnoughts, striking at engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. They saw Vren ships drift powerless as their drives were disabled one by one. They saw a species that was supposed to be small and weak and harmless take apart the most feared fleet in the galaxy, with patience, intelligence, and a kind of creative stubbornness that defied everything they thought they knew about war. Lena was the center of it all. She stood in the operations room with both hands pressed to the console, her tattoo burning so brightly that it was painful to look at. Data flowed through her: fleet positions, weapon status, damage reports, sensor readings, a river of information that she processed and redirected to the human ships in real time. She was the living bridge between intelligence and action, the point where a century of watching became a single hour of doing. It was destroying her. Blood ran from her nose in a thin red line. Her skin was so hot that the air above her hands shimmered. Her body trembled with the effort of channeling more data than any human nervous system was designed to handle. The nano-symbiotic system pushed her beyond her limits and held her there, but it could not do so forever. She could feel the edges of herself beginning to fray, like cloth pulled too tight. She held on. She held on because the battle was not over. And because the people on this station, the Olani who had shown humans kindness, the delegates who had ignored them, even the Raelith who had laughed at them, were depending on her, whether they knew it or not. She held on, because that was what humans did. They held on. Torek Kal's flagship was the last to fall. A coordinated strike from 12 human ships disabled its engines and weapons in a sequence so precise that it took exactly 41 seconds from start to finish. The great ship went dark, drifting powerless, its lights dying one by one like stars going out. When the flagship went silent, 14 Vren captains surrendered independently. Without Torek's voice, they had no reason to fight, and no idea how. The battle was over in under 3 hours. Silence settled over the station like snow. The screens showed the Vren fleet hanging motionless in space, disabled and defeated, surrounded by human ships that glowed with the heat of spent weapons. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The moment was too large for words. Then the Olani began to sing. It started with Thesara, a low, resonant sound that came from deep inside her body, a vibration that the Olani reserved for moments of profound and overwhelming respect. Other Olani joined, one by one, until the sound filled the station, like a heartbeat. Then other species joined too in their own ways. The Kelthari drummed their fists against their chests, the Dothani whistled in high harmonics, and even a few Raelith added a quiet crystalline hum that blended with the rest. In the operations room, Lena heard the sound and smiled. Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. The tattoo on her arm dimmed. The blazing orange and gold faded to something pale and quiet, like embers after a fire. Thesara was the first to reach her, catching the small human woman before she hit the floor, wrapping gentle tentacles around her shaking body. Thesara looked down at the tiger on Lena's arm. The ink was almost invisible now, drained and spent, a ghost of what it had been. The tiger's eyes were closed again. "Will it come back?" Thesara whispered. Lena was barely conscious, her breath shallow, her skin still warm. But she smiled. That same warm, quiet smile she had worn on the day she arrived, when nobody had looked at her twice. "Tigers always come back," she said. And then she closed her eyes and let the dark take her. 3 weeks passed. The Covenant station was repaired. The scars from the battle were patched over with new metal and fresh paint. But the scars on the galaxy's understanding of itself would take much longer to heal. Everything that the known civilizations had believed about the order of power, about who mattered and who did not, had been turned inside out in a single day, and no amount of fresh paint could cover that. Lena spent most of those 3 weeks in a medical bay. The Olani doctors were gentle and curious, treating her overheated nervous system with cooling compounds, and monitoring the faded tattoo on her arm with instruments that could not quite explain what they were seeing. The ink was still there, but it had retreated deep beneath her skin, resting, recovering, rebuilding itself one cell at a time. The doctors told her it would come back fully, but slowly, months, maybe longer. She did not mind. She was tired in a way that went deeper than her body. She had carried the weight of a secret that was bigger than herself for a long time. And now that the secret was out, the weight had not disappeared. It had only changed shape. The galaxy knew about the Wardens now. It knew about the network. It knew what humans had been doing in the shadows for over a century. And it had feelings about that. Strong feelings. The Dominion Council met every day, and every day the arguments grew louder. Some species were furious. The Raelith ambassador Sor Vithis called the Human Intelligence Network the greatest violation of galactic trust in recorded history. He stood before the council and declared that humans were not the harmless creatures they had pretended to be. They were spies, liars, and manipulators who had violated the sovereignty of every species on the station. He demanded sanctions. He demanded the human network be dismantled. He demanded that every warden be identified and expelled from galactic space. Other species were more complicated in their reactions. The Kelthari, whose fleet had benefited directly from the intelligence Lena shared during the crisis, argued that the humans had done nothing more than what any wise species would do in a hostile galaxy. The Dothani pointed out that if humans had wanted to use their intelligence for conquest, they could have done so years ago, and nobody would have seen it coming. The fact that they had not was, the Dothani said, the most important part of the story. And the Olani stood firmly on humanity's side. Thesara spoke to the council with a calm that cut through the noise. She reminded them that the Vren had been hours away from destroying the station and killing every delegate aboard. She reminded them that the species screaming loudest about trust were the same species that had been ready to surrender and let millions of civilians in the border systems be swallowed by Vren expansion without a fight. She reminded them that when the moment came, it was not the Raylith or the Kelthari or any of the 12 great civilizations that had stood between the galaxy and destruction. It was the humans. The small, soft, breakable humans that everyone had spent 100 years laughing at. The council was divided, but the council was always divided. What mattered was the vote, and the vote was coming. Torek Kal was a prisoner aboard his own disabled flagship, held under guard by a joint force of human and Olani ships. Without his iron grip, the Vren Dominion had fractured into factions. Hardliners who wanted revenge, moderates who wanted peace, and reformists who had been waiting for someone to break Torek's power so they could step forward. The reformists were winning. For the first time in Vren history, there were voices calling for diplomacy instead of conquest. It would take years to see where that road led, but the road existed now, and it had not existed before. A proper human ambassador arrived at the station on the 18th day. Her name was Director Ayala, and she was everything Lena was not. Tall, polished, dressed in formal clothes, and comfortable in the spotlight. She came with a small team of diplomats and a formal request that had been a long time coming. Humanity wanted a seat on the Dominion Council. The debate was the fiercest the Council had seen in living memory. Sor Vethis argued that giving humans a seat would reward deception. A Vren moderate, speaking for the first time in the council chamber, argued that any species capable of what humans had done deserved respect, whether the council liked it or not. Smaller delegations whispered among themselves, trying to calculate which side it was safer to be on. And then Lena testified. She walked into the council chamber wearing a simple shirt with short sleeves. The tattoo was visible, faded to a soft ghost of its former self. The tiger barely visible against her skin, its eyes closed. She looked small in the enormous chamber, surrounded by beings who were taller, stronger, older, and more powerful than her in every way that the galaxy had traditionally measured power. She did not give a speech about human greatness. She did not boast about the battle. She did not list humanity's achievements or make threats about what would happen if the council refused. She talked about fear. "We are afraid of you," she told the council. Her voice was quiet but steady, and it carried in the silence. "We have always been afraid of you. From the first day we left our world and realized how big the galaxy was and how small we were, we have been afraid. Every species in this room is bigger than us, or stronger than us, or older than us. You have ships that could crack our planet open. You have weapons we cannot match. You have histories that stretch back to a time before we learned to write." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had mocked her species, ignored her species, and very nearly let her species die along with everyone else on this station. "The Warden program was not born from ambition," she said. "It was born from terror. We looked at the galaxy and we saw a place where the weak were conquered and the strong did as they pleased. and we knew that if we did not find a way to survive, we would not survive. So we did the only thing we knew how to do. We watched, we listened, we learned, we remembered, not because we wanted power over you, but because we were small and frightened and desperate, and small things either learn to be clever or they die. The chamber was perfectly still. You can punish us for that if you want to, Lena said. You can sanction us, you can expel us, you can call us spies and liars, and you would not be entirely wrong. But I would ask you to remember what we did with the knowledge we gathered. We did not use it to conquer. We did not sell it to the highest bidder. We did not blackmail or manipulate or destroy. We kept it quiet, and we truly hoped, that we would never have to use it at all. And when we finally did use it, we used it to protect this station and the people on it. People who had spent a century telling us we did not matter. She let the words settle. Then she added softly, "That was a choice. We could have made a different one. We chose this. I hope that means something to you." She stepped back from the speaking platform and walked to her seat, and the chamber remained silent for a long time after she sat down. Thesara spoke last. She rose from her place among the Olani delegation and stood before the council with her large, dark eyes shining. She said that every great civilization in the history of the galaxy had been built on conquest. The strong took from the weak. The powerful rose by pushing others down. It was the oldest story in the stars, repeated 1,000 times across 1,000 species, and it had never once produced lasting peace. Humans, she said, were different. They had grown powerful in secret, and then revealed themselves only when others were in danger. They had possessed the ability to dominate, and had chosen not to. They had been laughed at, ignored, dismissed, and humiliated for over a century. And when the moment came, they had risked everything to protect the very beings who had looked down on them. That, Thesara said, is not the behavior of a juvenile species. That is wisdom, and if this council cannot recognize wisdom when it stands in front of us with a faded tattoo and tired eyes, then perhaps we are the ones who are not ready. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. The Raylith voted no. 2 other species abstained. But the rest voted yes, and by a margin that was larger than anyone had expected, humanity was granted the 13th seat on the Dominion Council. There was no celebration, just a quiet shift in the balance of the galaxy, like a door opening into a room that had always been there. That evening, Lena stood at the observation viewport on the upper deck, the same spot where she had stood on her first day, when nobody had known her name and nobody had cared. The stars outside were the same stars. The view had not changed, but everything else had. Thesara found her there, as Lena had somehow known she would. The Olani ambassador stood beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke. They just watched the stars together, 2 small beings in a very large galaxy, sharing a silence that was more comfortable than any words could have been. Then Thesara turned to her and asked, with the gentle curiosity that was the heart of her species, "How many wardens are there, Lena?" Truly. Lena looked at her. Her smile was the same smile she had worn on the day she arrived. Soft, kind, and completely harmless. "Enough," she said. On her arm, beneath the faded ink, the ghost of a tiger rested in its stripes. Its eyes were closed, its body was still. It looked like nothing more than a tattoo, something decorative, something harmless, something not worth a second glance. But as the starlight fell across Lena's skin, the tiger's eye caught the light. And just for a moment, it blinked.